Hello there. Welcome to Breakfast All Day. So good to see you. How's it going? I am Christy. With me for our review of Respect is Tim Grierson, our great friend. Matt and Alonzo are out in the ether. They have no respect because they haven't seen it. Ha ha. This is the Aretha Franklin biopic. Perhaps you've heard of it. Jennifer Hudson is Aretha Franklin. And this takes place between 1952 and 1972, from when she was a little girl with this incredible outsized talent beyond her years, through her becoming a star and dealing with both her overbearing father, played by Forrest Whitaker, and her abusive husband, played by Marlon Wayans. And it's how she rose to fame. And it ends with the Amazing Grace gospel album and documentary being shot in Los Angeles. This is a movie that is not aware that Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story exists, because it hits every single music biopic cliche. Like every single one. There are, characters who come on screen and announce who they are and explain things. And there are montages, so many montages of like albums and awards and like years going by on the screen. She hits her dark fucking period as Dewey Cox does. And it is all so rushed and so empty. Jennifer Hudson, never for a second did I forget that I was watching Jennifer Hudson playing Aretha Franklin. I never felt like I was actually watching somebody who had like lost herself in the role. And I know that Aretha Franklin herself approved of the casting. She's up for it, of course, musically for the challenge of singing all these songs. But I never forgot that I was watching Jennifer Hudson singing Aretha Franklin songs. And even in the moments where you see her process, which could have been kind of fascinating in terms of how certain songs came together, because a movie like Walk Hard exists where you see that, where she goes down to Muscle Shoals and records, I Never Loved a Man, and all the musicians in the studio are kind of like following her lead and playing along. And all of a sudden, what do you know? We got a hit on our hands. It's like, it's also unintentionally hilarious and lacking in self-awareness and a disappointment. Tim, what do you think?
I'm pretty much on the same page. I mean, what's frustrating about the movie is, I think to its credit, it really wants to say a lot and do a lot, because it's not just about her as a singer. It's this idea of her as a cultural figure, especially during the moments of the civil rights struggle in the 1960s and 1970s. It's also about her as a feminist icon. And so it's juggling all these ideas about who Aretha Franklin was and what she represented. And the movie is 2 hours and 25 minutes, something like that. And so even at that length, though, I have to say, it still feels like it's not long enough. And I don't mean in terms of the movie's so good I would have wanted to see more of it. It's almost like for as much material as they're covering, and they're covering 20 years and all these different aspects of her life, it almost feels like it has to be a mini-series. I haven't seen the Cynthia Erivo series from earlier this year from National Geographic.
Neither have I.
So maybe it did a better job in terms of encompassing all of this. But I found myself just thinking, if there was a 4-hour cut of this, maybe it would have done it justice, because what we have on the screen now is this thing, and then this thing happens, and then this thing happens, and then, I mean, your comparison to Dewey Cox is not far off in terms of like, it's not this bad. I'm being glib about this, but it's like, hello, Martin Luther King Jr. and it's not that clumsy, but it's close. And there's certain people who are introduced that way where it's like, no, this is an important element of her story and her life, but because of the time constraints, that's kind of how people are introduced. And then they just kind of go off and do other things. And there's also this whole undercurrent of Aretha Franklin had all this childhood trauma. And this childhood trauma she didn't really kind of process until she was older and became more successful. This is a movie about, she had a baby when she was 12. She had a baby when she was 12, or I forget if she was pregnant at 12 or had the baby at 12. And that's a thing that's important and is meaningful in terms of her life. And the movie turns it into, and this is such a biopic thing that drives me crazy, of, oh, you see, her demon is blank and blank and blank. And so they reduce that part of her life to, aha, that's her dark, tragic backstory. And it doesn't mean to be insulting and simplistic, but it kind of comes across that way, at least for me. So there's so much, like, especially now in 2021, I feel like a story about Aretha Franklin is so depressingly relevant in terms of like Me Too and Black Lives Matter. There's so much stuff that her story represents, but the movie is it just gets fed into that biopic translator, and it's just like, that's the movie that comes out. And I'm a big fan of Amazing Grace, that documentary. It's on Hulu now. That's essentially the ending of the movie is her doing that. And I watched the film and I thought, I really just want to watch that documentary now, because even though there's not interviews in that documentary, it's just as it's happening, as she's making that concert album, I feel like you get a stronger sense of her in certain ways than even you do in the movie. I don't fault Jennifer Hudson. I think she kind of does the best that she can, and she just certainly can sing. But as everybody has mentioned, like, this is one of those films that ends with, here's footage of the actual people. And this is a movie that does not need to do that, because when they bring on Aretha Franklin very late in her life, singing a Carole King song.
She's singing Natural Woman at the Kennedy Center honors when Carole King is being honored there.
Yeah. And it's like, even later in her life, you watch Aretha Franklin and you're like, Jennifer Hudson's a good singer, but like, this is so much, it's not just the singing, but there's such a presence that she has where you're like, you should not have shown this, because it doesn't it doesn't do your performance, and it doesn't do your film. It doesn't help. It actually hurts in some ways, because you think that's the real thing. And as much as this movie, there's a lot of reverence, there's a lot of, I can't think of a better word, so pun intended, respect towards Aretha Franklin in the movie. There's such affection for her, but to me, it just feels like it's such a cliched version. It is the Dewey. Unfortunately, because Dewey Cox now exists, every biopic now has to contend with the idea that people know the formula and know that the formula is funny. I have to say, like, in general, I just feel like biopics are better when it's like, we're going to take 3 months or 6 months and just like have like a narrative story, as opposed to, I mean, in some ways this is only 20 years, but it still feels like it's too much and also not enough simultaneously.
It is, yeah. And it feels weirdly superficial, given the running time and given the fact that Jennifer Hudson's on screen for nearly every second of this movie. Like, I didn't really have a feel for Aretha Franklin despite this. I mean, except for in glimmers, like in the Muscle Shoals recording session. And also later on when she's working with the choir that will sing behind her at Amazing Grace. Like, as far as technique and just like the nitty gritty of the craft, she clearly had vision and she had some control. And so to watch her exert that, as far as telling the chorus, like how long to hold the vibrato, or like what kind of swing she wanted on the bass line, like she knew. And to see those elements play out, that's fascinating, because I didn't realize that she had that much of a say, and just to see her as the technical element of her talent beyond just the power was really interesting to me. The thing was showing Aretha at the end, just like when she gets up from the piano and like drops the fur coat, like there is more that indicates more about Aretha Franklin in that moment than anything Jennifer Hudson has the opportunity to do over the course of the actual film.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's a screenwriting thing, right? This idea of show don't tell. It's like when Aretha Franklin's at the end of the movie, she embodies that person, because she is that person, in a way that the movie just tells, and it's just not the same thing.
We should mention Liesl Tommy directed, Tracy Scott Wilson wrote with a story by for Callie Corey. That was interesting. Disappointing, really. It just made me kind of want, like, maybe there should just be like a Jennifer Hudson like cover album of Aretha songs. But still, it feels like there's such reverence and almost not restraint, but just like perfection, like tidy perfection in the performance. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's just a tough thing of, and Aretha Franklin has not been dead very long, and so there's such a shadow. There's always going to be a shadow with Aretha Franklin anyway. But just the idea of having to get it right. It's a movie that feels a little nervous about wanting to make sure it gets everything right. I think that's part of the issue. And this, I mean, what's difficult about the movie is you watch it and you go, oh, I see why this movie exists, because this story is so rich and so much stuff. I mean, just the idea of how the film almost kind of deconstructs the idea of the diva, and Aretha Franklin's always been described as a diva, and in recent times has been pushed back against that being sort of like this like sexist term, calling like these powerful women divas. When the movie is interesting, it's like, no, she had to be that because for most of her young life, her father pushed her around and then her husband pushed her around, and she felt like she needed a man to make her feel like she was worthy and valuable. That's a really interesting idea. And the movie occasionally will show Aretha Franklin later in the film have to kind of assert herself because she realizes if I don't, these people are going to keep on walking all over me. It's just an interesting idea, but it just like, it pops up and then it goes away. And then it's like, hello, Jerry Wexler, record executive. And then it falls back into that thing of we've got to identify all these people because audiences aren't going to know what this is. And we need more newspaper headlines and magazine covers so we know that she's becoming successful. And now this album's come out. The movie is entirely like trapped by the fact that it has to do the things. It has to do these things so that it checks off those boxes.
Mark Maron's really good though as Jerry Wexler, music producer.
Yeah, he is. A friend of mine joked.
Warmth and humor, yes.
Yeah, a friend of mine joked like he's not the same character as he is in that terrible David Bowie movie. Is he? No, he's a different record type, but he's kind of doing the same. Like, hey, I'm the guy who's going to tell you what to do. He kind of provides the same energy to both movies. I mean, Marlon Wayans is okay. You know, Forrest Whitaker is okay, but those characters are like, you are this bad figure in her life. They're not interesting, complicated characters.
Here's the note you hit. Anyway, I'm saying 3.5.
I'm a little higher than that. I'm a 5 because there's so much in there, but just, yeah, like you said, Christy, it's a frustrating experience.
Yeah. 4.3 is our number. I believe Respect is only in theaters. So if you are dying to see the Aretha Franklin biopic, we have warned you. Anyway, thanks for watching, you guys. And you can follow us in all the places where you follow people who do things. We are at Be Fast All Day on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. We have a Patreon. Perhaps you've heard of it. It is patreon.com/BeFastAllDay. We are doing Ted Lasso recaps. This week is the Christmas episode, which Alonzo is very excited about. And we are doing for August Off the Menu. The movie you guys chose for us is From Here to Eternity. So we're going to go romp in the waves and talk about that. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks, Tim. We'll see you guys soon. Bye.